Avoidant individuals don't fall into deep emotional attachment randomly. When they become strongly drawn to someone, it is usually because of very specific psychological patterns that quietly activate something inside them. Their attraction is not driven by chaos, intensity, or emotional chasing. Instead, it is shaped by autonomy, emotional balance, and the way someone respects both closeness and space at the same time. People with an avoidant attachment style are naturally sensitive to pressure. When they feel controlled or emotionally overwhelmed, their instinct is to step back. But when they experience calmness, consistency, and emotional independence from another person, something very different happens inside them. It doesn't push them away, it pulls them in. What makes them start feeling attached is rarely about big romantic gestures or constant reassurance. It is about how you behave when things are uncertain, how you respond when distance appears, and how grounded you remain in your own emotional state. They notice when you stop overextending yourself, when you stop trying to manage their reactions, and when you stop chasing clarity that should come naturally. In that shift, something powerful forms. Freedom starts to feel like attraction. Your calm presence becomes a signal of safety instead of demand. Their nervous system begins to relax around you instead of preparing for pressure. They still want connection, but now it doesn't feel forced. It feels optional, which paradoxically makes it more appealing. When your behavior reflects emotional independence, self-respect, and steadiness without emotional demands, it begins to interact with both their conscious awareness and their subconscious attachment system. They may not fully understand why, but they start thinking about you more. Your presence feels different from others. It feels safer, quieter, and more stable. This is not something they usually admit out loud, but internally, they begin to value that stability. They notice the absence of pressure. They notice that being around you doesn't require them to defend themselves or retreat. And slowly, a quiet attachment starts forming. Love for an avoidant is not created through chasing or proving your worth. It is triggered through emotional signals like patience, clarity, confidence, and inner stability. When these qualities are consistently present, their attachment system begins to activate naturally. And instead of pulling away, they start leaning in. This is where the 6 key behaviors come in. Each one plays a role in why they start feeling deeply drawn, even to the point of emotional obsession, without fully understanding why. The first major shift that made an avoidant feel attached was when you stopped chasing them. For avoidant individuals, being chased often feels like pressure. Constant messaging, repeated reassurance seeking, or emotional urgency can feel overwhelming. It creates an internal sense of losing control, and that feeling connects directly to their deepest fear, being trapped or emotionally consumed. When chasing is present, they don't experience closeness. They experience tension, and tension makes them withdraw. But when you stopped chasing, the entire emotional atmosphere changed. You stopped overextending your energy. You stopped sending repeated messages just to maintain connection. You stopped explaining your feelings over and over to be understood. You also stopped trying to fix or force emotional responses from them. And in that space of withdrawal from pursuit, something unexpected happened inside them. Their nervous system relaxed. The pressure they were subconsciously preparing for disappeared. There was no longer emotional urgency pulling them in different directions, and for the first time, connection didn't feel like something they had to respond to immediately or carefully manage. It started to feel like a choice instead of an obligation. Psychologically, when an avoidant feels they are not being cornered or emotionally pressured, their attachment system is allowed to activate in a more natural and voluntary way. Your absence of chasing created emotional breathing room, and that breathing room created curiosity. The paradox is simple but powerful. The less you pursued them, the more space they had to notice you. And in that space, they began to register your calm confidence, your emotional control, and your ability to exist without constantly reaching for them. That contrast stood out deeply. Over time, your energy became something they returned to mentally. Not because they were forced to, but because it felt stable. And stability, for an avoidant mind, becomes quietly attractive. This is how stopping the chase becomes the foundation of attachment. Not through manipulation, not through strategy, but through emotional absence of pressure that allows genuine curiosity to grow. The second thing you did that increased their emotional pull was respecting their space without punishing them for it. Most people react in extremes when an avoidant pulls away. Some chase harder, trying to restore closeness immediately. Others respond with coldness, silence, or emotional withdrawal as a form of punishment. Both reactions create tension. Both reinforce the avoidant belief that closeness comes with emotional cost. But you didn't respond that way. You gave space without attaching anger to it. You allowed distance without turning it into punishment. You didn't make them feel guilty for needing time. You didn't withdraw your emotional presence just to get a reaction from them. Instead, you stayed steady. Psychologically, this is very rare for an avoidant to experience. It creates a new association. Distance does not automatically equal conflict. Space does not automatically lead to emotional damage. They begin to see that your connection does not collapse when they step back. That realization reduces internal fear. And when fear decreases, attachment becomes possible. Your consistency without pressure sends a quiet message. I am here, but I am not controlling you. That combination of presence and freedom is deeply compelling for avoidant individuals. Over time, they stop associating you with emotional threat. Instead, they start associating you with emotional safety. And safety is what allows them to move closer again on their own terms. The third behavior that increased their attachment was your emotional regulation. Avoidant individuals are highly sensitive to emotional intensity. Raised voices, emotional outbursts, panic responses, or desperation can feel overwhelming to their nervous system. These reactions often push them into withdrawal, not because they don't care, but because they feel emotionally flooded. But your response was different. In moments of tension, you remained grounded. You didn't escalate emotionally. You didn't turn conflict into chaos. You didn't allow fear or frustration to control your behavior. Instead, you stayed calm, thoughtful, and measured. This created a completely different emotional experience for them. Instead of feeling like they needed to escape the situation, they could stay present within it. Instead of preparing to defend themselves, they could actually listen. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they felt contained. Your emotional stability became a form of emotional safety for them. And over time, the brain starts associating that stability with comfort and trust. What once might have triggered distance now begins to create closeness. They start to notice something important. Being around you does not feel chaotic. It feels steady, predictable, safe. And for someone who is used to emotional intensity or inconsistency, that difference becomes magnetic. They may not express it clearly, but internally, they begin to rely on your presence as a grounding force. This is how emotional regulation turns into emotional attraction. Not because you are trying to impress them, but because your calm presence becomes a place where their nervous system can finally relax. And when someone feels emotionally safe around you, attachment begins to form quietly, deeply, and often more strongly than expected. The fourth thing that made an avoidant feel deeply drawn to you was your decision to stop constantly seeking reassurance. Avoidant individuals are especially sensitive to emotional pressure, particularly when it comes in the form of repeated requests for validation, confirmation, or commitment. Questions like, "Do you love me? Are we okay?" or frequent attempts to check where things stand can unintentionally activate their fear of losing independence. Even when the intention is love, it can feel like emotional pressure to them, and over time, that pressure pushes them to withdraw. But you shifted something important. You stopped relying on them to constantly reassure you. Instead, you began trusting your own feelings and emotional awareness. You didn't need repeated confirmation to feel secure. You allowed your inner stability to guide you rather than depending on their responses to regulate your emotions. Psychologically, this creates a very powerful reaction in avoidant attachment patterns. When pressure is removed, they are finally able to observe you without feeling cornered. Your emotional world is no longer revolving around their validation. And in that space, something subtle begins to happen. They start noticing your independence, your calm confidence, and the way you remain grounded without needing constant affirmation. This naturally creates curiosity. They begin to reflect on you more, think about your emotional state, and wonder why you don't react the way others do. Not because you are distant or cold, but because you are self-contained and steady. At that point, Closeness is no longer something forced onto them. It becomes something they can move toward freely. And that shift changes everything. Avoidant individuals are not drawn to emotional dependence. They are drawn to emotional steadiness. When you stopped seeking reassurance, you communicated without words that your love was not born out of fear or insecurity. It existed without pressure. This quiet confidence activates attraction instead of resistance. Their nervous system, which is usually alert to emotional demands, begins to relax around your presence. And in that relaxation, attachment slowly starts to form. In simple terms, not chasing reassurance doesn't weaken connection. It strengthens it. It creates space for attraction to grow naturally instead of being forced. They begin to feel more curious, more drawn in, and more emotionally engaged without fully understanding why. Your quiet self-trust sends a strong message. Love does not need to be begged for, and connection does not require pressure. And for an avoidant, this becomes deeply compelling. This is one of the most powerful reasons they begin to feel intensely attached in a quiet, steady, and often unexpected way. The fifth thing that made an avoidant fall deeply in love with you was your emotional independence. People with an avoidant attachment style naturally value independence above almost everything else. They are highly cautious of emotional dependence, neediness, or any dynamic where someone relies on them to feel whole, stable, or validated. When they sense emotional dependence, their instinct is to create distance, not out of lack of care, but out of a need to protect their sense of freedom. What set you apart was your emotional self-sufficiency. You had your own direction, your own interests, your own internal world. You didn't look to them to complete you or regulate your emotional balance. Instead, you carried your own sense of stability within yourself. Psychologically, this sends a very strong signal to an avoidant mind. It communicates that connection does not equal pressure, that love does not mean obligation, and that closeness does not automatically lead to emotional entanglement or loss of independence. This creates a paradoxical attraction. While avoidant individuals tend to withdraw from people who are emotionally dependent, they are naturally drawn to those who are emotionally whole. Your independence made closeness feel safer, not heavier. It allowed them to engage without feeling responsible for your emotional stability. Because of that, they could connect with you voluntarily instead of feeling pressured or needed. Your emotional autonomy became something they respected and were quietly drawn to. It gave the relationship a sense of balance. You weren't reaching to be filled. You were simply choosing to share space. That distinction matters deeply for avoidant attachment. It allowed them to see you as someone stable, grounded, and emotionally self-contained. Over time, this creates both admiration and attraction. They begin to associate your presence with calmness rather than emotional demand. And when connection feels safe instead of consuming, attachment grows naturally. Your independence didn't push them away. It actually made them more curious about you. It created a dynamic where closeness felt like a choice, not an obligation. And that is exactly what makes avoidant attachment soften and open over time. The sixth and final thing that made an avoidant fall deeply in love with you was your ability to let them come toward you on their own terms. Avoidant individuals are highly sensitive to pressure. When they feel pushed to express emotions, commit, or move faster than they are comfortable with, their instinct is to pull back, not because they lack feelings, but because their system is wired to protect autonomy. What changed everything was that you didn't force movement. You didn't chase, demand clarity, or push for emotional responses before they were ready. You didn't withdraw love as punishment or create emotional tension to get a reaction. Instead, you stayed steady, present, and emotionally grounded. You allowed them space to decide how and when they wanted to engage. This creates something rare in their experience: emotional safety without pressure. When closeness is available but not forced, the avoidant nervous system begins to relax. Instead of feeling trapped, they feel free. And in that freedom, curiosity replaces fear. They start initiating contact on their own. They begin reaching out first, engaging more openly, and slowly stepping closer, not because they are being pulled, but because they are choosing to. and that choice is everything. For an avoidant, voluntary connection feels safe, it feels real, it feels sustainable. By allowing them to come toward you naturally, you also reinforced your own emotional boundaries without ever needing to say a word. You demonstrated that your presence is stable, patient, and not dependent on their timing. This creates a powerful psychological paradox. The more freedom they have, the more drawn they become. Your calm, grounded energy becomes something they trust, and trust is the foundation where attachment begins to deepen. When all of these 6 patterns come together, stopping the chase, respecting space, staying emotionally regulated, not seeking reassurance, maintaining emotional independence, and allowing them to approach you, something profound happens. Their nervous system begins to soften. What once felt like pressure now feels like safety. What once triggered withdrawal now invites closeness. And what once created distance now slowly builds attachment. Avoidant love is rarely loud or dramatic. It develops quietly, internally, and often beneath the surface of awareness. But when they feel safe with you, it becomes real, steady, and deeply rooted. You didn't force anything. You didn't manipulate anything. You simply created an emotional environment built on calmness, respect, and autonomy. And in that environment, their attachment system activated naturally. This is why they begin to feel drawn in, not through intensity, but through safety. Not through pressure, but through freedom. And over time, that becomes the kind of connection that feels deeply real, stable, and lasting. If this helped you understand avoidant attachment more clearly, reflect on how these patterns have shown up in your own experiences. In conclusion, avoidant attachment is not activated through pressure, chasing, or emotional intensity, but through calm consistency, respect, and emotional safety. When you stopped chasing, stopped seeking constant reassurance, maintained your emotional independence, stayed regulated, respected space, and allowed them to approach you on their own terms, you changed the entire emotional experience of the connection. Instead of feeling controlled or overwhelmed, they began to feel safe, understood, and emotionally free. And in that safety, something subtle but powerful happened. Resistance softened, curiosity grew, and attachment started to form naturally. This kind of connection is not loud or dramatic. It develops quietly through trust and space rather than urgency or demand. Over time, what begins as distance can transform into genuine emotional closeness, when there is no pressure to perform love, only freedom to feel it. Avoidant individuals don't fall in love with intensity. They fall in love with emotional safety that still allows them to remain themselves. And when that balance is present, connection becomes not something they escape from, but something they slowly choose to return to.